What if I told you that everything you've been taught about success is backwards? Most people believe that winning comes from working harder, having more talent, or getting lucky breaks. But here's the truth that separates champions from everyone else. Winning isn't about what happens to you. It's about how your mind processes what happens to you. The difference between those who consistently win and those who constantly struggle isn't circumstances, genetics, or resources. It's mental architecture. It's having a mind that's been deliberately engineered for victory, while everyone else operates with a default factory setting that's designed for survival, not success. In this audiobook, you're going to discover how to completely rewire your mental operating system. You'll learn the exact cognitive frameworks that billionaires, world champions, and elite performers use to think their way to consistent victory. This isn't motivational fluff or positive thinking garbage. This is the deep science of mental dominance, backed by neuroscience, psychology, and real-world results. By the time you finish this, you won't just think differently. You'll think at a completely different level than 99% of people around you. Your mind will become your greatest competitive advantage. Chapter 1. The Winner's Mental Operating System. Right now, your mind is running on an operating system that wasn't designed for the modern world. This mental software was programmed by evolution for one purpose: keeping you alive in dangerous environments. It's optimized for avoiding threats, conserving energy, and fitting in with the tribe. But here's the problem. The mental patterns that kept your ancestors alive are the exact same patterns that keep you mediocre today. Your brain's default programming is sabotaging your success, and most people never realize it. The survival brain operates on three core principles that directly conflict with winning. First, it prioritizes short-term safety over long-term success. Your brain would rather have you stay comfortable and secure today than take the risks necessary for breakthrough tomorrow. Second, it's designed to notice and focus on what's wrong, what's missing, and what could go wrong. This negativity bias helped humans survive by staying alert to dangers, but it also creates a mental environment where you're constantly focused on problems instead of opportunities. Third, your survival brain seeks social acceptance above individual achievement. It would rather have you blend in and be liked than stand out and potentially face criticism. Champions operate with a completely different mental operating system. They've rewired their brains to run on what I call the winner's operating system. This isn't about positive thinking or trying to override your natural instincts through willpower. It's about understanding how your brain works and deliberately reprogramming it with new mental software that's optimized for achievement rather than survival. The winner's operating system has 5 core components that work together to create unstoppable mental momentum. The first component is outcome obsession. While most people focus on activities, winners focus obsessively on results. They train their minds to think backwards from their desired outcomes, asking not, "What should I do?" but "What result am I trying to create? And what's the fastest path to get there?" This single shift in mental focus eliminates 80% of the busy work that keeps average people spinning their wheels. The second component is strategic paranoia. This isn't about being fearful or negative. Strategic paranoia means your mind is constantly scanning for potential obstacles, threats, and failure points. so you can address them before they become problems. While others are optimistically hoping things will work out, winners are pessimistically preparing for everything that could go wrong. This mental habit allows them to navigate challenges that blindside everyone else. The third component is leverage thinking. Average minds think in terms of linear effort and linear results. Winner minds think in terms of exponential impact. They're constantly asking, how can I get 10x results without 10x effort? What's the one action that would make everything else easier or unnecessary? How can I use systems, people, and resources to multiply my output? This creates a completely different relationship with time and energy. The fourth component is contrast awareness. Most people live in a bubble where they only compare themselves to people in their immediate environment. Winner minds deliberately seek out contrast by studying the absolute best in their field and other fields. They understand that your environment sets your standards, so they expose themselves to higher standards continuously. This prevents the complacency that kills most people's growth. The fifth component is anti-fragile adaptation. While most people try to avoid difficulties and setbacks, winner minds are programmed to get stronger from challenges. They don't just bounce back from obstacles, they use obstacles as raw material to build additional capacity. Every failure becomes data. Every setback becomes strength training for their resilience. Every criticism becomes information for improvement. Installing this new operating system isn't about changing your personality or becoming someone else. It's about upgrading the software your mind runs on. Just like upgrading your phone's operating system gives you access to better features and performance, upgrading your mental operating system gives you access to cognitive abilities that seemed impossible before. The process requires understanding how neuroplasticity works, and then deliberately creating new neural pathways through specific mental practices. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to reorganize and create new neural connections throughout your life. Every thought you think, every decision you make, and every action you take is either strengthening existing mental patterns or creating new ones. Most people accidentally reinforce their limiting patterns because they're unconscious of this process. Winners take conscious control of their neuroplasticity, deliberately choosing thoughts and actions that strengthen the mental patterns they want while weakening the patterns they don't want. The key is understanding that your brain doesn't distinguish between mental rehearsal and actual experience. When you vividly imagine yourself successfully handling a challenging situation, your brain creates the same neural pathways as if you actually experienced that success. This is why winners spend significant time mentally rehearsing success scenarios, while average people spend their mental energy worrying about failure scenarios. They're literally programming their brains for opposite outcomes. Chapter 2. Destroying limiting beliefs and installing power beliefs. Your beliefs aren't just opinions you hold about the world. They're the invisible operating instructions that determine what you notice, what you attempt, and what you think is possible. Most people walk around with beliefs that were programmed into them during childhood, adolescence, or moments of emotional intensity, and they never question whether these beliefs are serving their success. Here's what most people don't realize. Your beliefs are creating your reality more powerfully than your actions. If you have limiting beliefs about what's possible for someone like you, you'll unconsciously sabotage any actions that would prove those beliefs wrong. Limiting beliefs operate like invisible chains. They don't just hold you back from taking action. They prevent you from even seeing opportunities that exist. If you believe that people like me don't become wealthy, your brain will literally filter out information about wealth, building strategies, dismiss success stories as unrealistic, and find reasons why wealthy people are different from you. Your brain's reticular activating system, the part that determines what information gets through to your consciousness, is programmed by your beliefs. Change your beliefs, and you'll suddenly start noticing possibilities that were there all along, but invisible to you before. The most dangerous limiting beliefs are the ones that feel like facts. Beliefs like, I'm not good with money, I'm not a natural leader, or success requires sacrificing your personal life, feel true because you can find evidence to support them. But here's what winners understand. All beliefs are just interpretations of past experiences, and interpretations can be changed. The evidence you use to support limiting beliefs is highly selective. You're noticing the data that confirms what you already believe, while ignoring data that contradicts it. Winners systematically identify and destroy limiting beliefs using a process I call belief archaeology. First, they identify the belief by paying attention to their automatic thoughts when facing challenges or opportunities. Thoughts like, that's impossible for me, I don't have what it takes, or that only works for other people, are indicators of limiting beliefs operating below conscious awareness. Second, they trace the belief back to its origin. Most limiting beliefs were formed during emotional moments when you were young and impressionable, or during intense experiences where you made decisions about what these experiences meant about you or the world. Third, they question the belief's validity by asking, is this belief absolutely true, or is it just one possible interpretation? What evidence contradicts this belief? What would be possible if this belief wasn't true? What would someone who has achieved what I want believe instead? This process isn't about positive thinking or trying to convince yourself of something you don't believe. It's about recognizing that beliefs are just mental models, and mental models can be updated when you find better ones. The fourth step is installing power beliefs to replace the limiting ones. Power beliefs are mental frameworks that expand your sense of what's possible and increase your capacity for action. Examples include, every challenge is making me stronger. I can learn any skill I need to succeed. My past doesn't determine my future. There's always a way if I'm committed enough, and I'm constantly growing and improving. These aren't just positive affirmations, they're operating principles that change how you interpret experiences and what actions you take in response to challenges. Installing power beliefs requires understanding how beliefs are formed in the first place. Beliefs become powerful when they're supported by emotional intensity and repetition. This is why traumatic experiences often create strong limiting beliefs, and why motivational events can temporarily install empowering beliefs. But temporary inspiration fades unless it's reinforced with consistent mental practice and real-world evidence. Winners create emotional intensity around their power beliefs by connecting them to their deepest values and most important goals. They don't just intellectually accept that challenges make me stronger. They emotionally connect this belief to their desire to be a leader, protect their family, or achieve their mission. This emotional connection makes the belief feel real and important rather than just a nice idea. They also reinforce power beliefs through mental rehearsal and evidence collection. Every day, they spend time visualizing themselves successfully applying their power beliefs in challenging situations. They keep a record of evidence that supports their empowering beliefs. Times when they learned something quickly, overcame obstacles, or achieved goals they initially thought were impossible. This creates a positive feedback loop where power beliefs lead to more confident action, which creates more success, which provides more evidence for the power beliefs. The most sophisticated winners also understand that beliefs exist in hierarchies. Surface beliefs about specific situations are supported by deeper beliefs about identity and capability, which are supported by core beliefs about the nature of reality and what's possible. Changing surface beliefs without addressing deeper beliefs often results in temporary change that doesn't last. But when you transform core beliefs about your identity and capability, surface beliefs change automatically. Chapter 3. The Strategic Decision-Making Framework. Most people make decisions reactively, emotionally, or by copying what others are doing. They choose the path of least resistance, go with their gut feeling, or follow conventional wisdom without questioning whether it leads where they want to go. This approach to decision-making creates a random walk through life where success depends on luck rather than strategy. Winners understand that decisions are the steering wheel of life. The quality of your decisions determines the quality of your outcomes more than talent, luck, or circumstances. Strategic decision-making starts with clarity about what you're optimizing for. Most people have never clearly defined what success means to them specifically, so they can't evaluate whether a decision moves them closer to or further from their goals. They make decisions based on what feels good in the moment, what avoids discomfort, or what other people expect them to do. Winners start every decision by asking, "What am I trying to achieve? What would success look like in this situation? What are the possible outcomes of each option, and which outcomes align best with my long-term objectives?" This clarity prevents the trap of optimizing for the wrong variables. Most people optimize for comfort, approval, or immediate gratification without realizing these variables often conflict with their larger goals. They choose the job that feels safe rather than the one that offers growth opportunities. They avoid difficult conversations to maintain peace in the moment, even though these conversations would improve relationships long term. They spend money on things that provide immediate pleasure, rather than investing in assets that compound over time. Winners use a decision-making framework that evaluates options across multiple dimensions simultaneously. First, they consider the immediate impact. What are the short-term consequences of each option? What resources will this require? What are the risks and potential rewards in the next 30 to 90 days? Second, they analyze the long-term trajectory. Where does this path lead if I continue down it for years? What skills, relationships, or assets will this help me build? How does this decision affect my capability to make better decisions in the future? Third, they evaluate the opportunity cost. What am I saying no to by choosing this option? What other possibilities am I closing off? Are there higher leverage opportunities I should pursue instead? This is often the most important dimension because every yes is a no to something else. And many people fail to consider what they're giving up when they make commitments. Fourth, They assess alignment with their values and identity. Does this decision reflect who I want to be? Will I respect myself for making this choice? Does this move me toward or away from the person I'm becoming? This prevents decisions that create internal conflict or require you to act against your core values. The framework also includes systematic risk assessment. Winners don't avoid risk, they understand it and manage it strategically. They ask, what's the worst-case scenario, and can I handle it? What's the probability of different outcomes? How can I structure this decision to limit downside while maximizing upside? What would I need to be true for this to be the right choice? Most people either avoid risk completely, which guarantees mediocrity, or take reckless risks without proper analysis, which leads to preventable failures. Winners take calculated risks, where they've analyzed the probabilities, limited their downside exposure, and positioned themselves to benefit significantly if things go well. They also understand that in complex situations, the best decision often isn't obvious from the beginning. Instead of trying to make perfect decisions with incomplete information, they make the best decision possible with current information, then actively gather feedback and adjust course based on results. This requires building strong feedback loops into their decision-making process. Effective feedback loops involve setting clear criteria for success before making the decision, establishing specific timelines for evaluation, and honestly assessing results without letting ego or sunk cost bias distort their analysis. If a decision isn't producing expected results, they quickly pivot rather than continuing down a suboptimal path just because they committed to it. Winners also recognize that different types of decisions require different approaches. Reversible decisions with low consequences can be made quickly with minimal analysis. Irreversible decisions with high consequences deserve extensive research and consideration. They spend their decision-making energy proportionally, making quick calls on small matters, so they have mental bandwidth for the choices that really matter. Chapter 4. Building anti-fragile mental resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from setbacks and return to your previous level of functioning. But resilience isn't enough for sustained success. What you really need is anti-fragility, the ability to get stronger from challenges, obstacles, and even failures. Most people try to avoid difficulties and create lives with minimal stress or challenge. They think comfort and ease are the path to happiness and success. But this approach actually weakens you mentally and leaves you vulnerable when challenges inevitably arise. Anti-fragility is based on a fundamental principle from biology and systems theory. Living systems that are regularly exposed to appropriate stresses become stronger, while systems that are protected from all stress become weak and brittle. Your muscles grow stronger when they're stressed through resistance training. Your immune system becomes more robust when exposed to manageable challenges. Your mind works the same way. Mental strength comes from repeatedly facing challenges that are just beyond your current capacity and successfully navigating them. Winners deliberately seek out challenges that will build their anti-fragility. They volunteer for difficult projects, put themselves in situations where they'll be slightly out of their depth, and embrace opportunities that require them to grow rather than opportunities that let them coast on existing abilities. This isn't about being reckless or taking unnecessary risks. It's about understanding that your capacity grows only when you consistently operate at the edge of your current capabilities. The key to building anti-fragility is learning to reframe challenges as strength training for your mind. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" winners ask, What is this building in me? Instead of trying to eliminate stress from their lives, they try to optimize the type and amount of stress to maximize growth. They distinguish between productive stress that builds capacity and destructive stress that simply drains energy without providing benefits. Productive stress includes taking on stretch goals that require you to develop new skills, engaging in difficult conversations that improve relationships, or putting yourself in situations where you might fail but would learn valuable lessons from the attempt. Destructive stress includes chronic worry about things outside your control, perfectionism that prevents action, or overcommitting to low-value activities that create busyness without progress. Anti-fragile thinking also requires developing what psychologists call explanatory optimism, the ability to interpret setbacks in ways that preserve your sense of agency and possibility. When things go wrong, people typically explain the situation to themselves using 3 dimensions: personal versus impersonal, permanent versus temporary, and pervasive versus specific. People with low resilience tend to make negative events personal. It's my fault. Permanent. This always happens. And pervasive. Everything is going wrong. This explanatory style creates learned helplessness and reduces your willingness to try again. Anti-fragile thinkers interpret setbacks as impersonal. Multiple factors contributed to this outcome. Temporary. This is a temporary setback, not a permanent condition. And specific. This particular approach didn't work in this specific situation. But anti-fragile thinking goes beyond just avoiding negative explanations. It actively looks for the advantages and opportunities that challenges create. Every obstacle builds problem-solving skills. Every failure provides data about what doesn't work. Every criticism offers information for improvement. Every setback forces you to develop new capabilities or find better approaches. This doesn't mean being naive or pretending that negative events are actually positive. It means training your mind to automatically look for and extract value from every experience, especially difficult ones. Winners develop a mental habit of asking, "What can I learn from this? How can this make me stronger? What opportunity does this create? What would I need to believe about this situation to feel excited rather than defeated?" Building anti-fragility also requires developing emotional regulation skills that allow you to maintain clear thinking under pressure. Most people's decision-making quality deteriorates when they're stressed, angry, or fearful. Their emotions hijack their rational thinking, leading to reactive decisions that make problems worse. Anti-fragile individuals develop the ability to notice emotional intensity without being controlled by it. This involves practicing what neuroscientists call cognitive reappraisal, changing how you think about a situation to change how you feel about it. Instead of trying to suppress negative emotions, which typically makes them stronger, you learn to reinterpret triggering situations in ways that naturally reduce emotional intensity and increase your sense of control. Chapter 5. The Psychology of Consistent Peak Performance. Consistency separates true champions from one-hit wonders. Anyone can have a great day, week, or even month, but sustained excellence requires understanding the psychological principles that enable peak performance on demand, regardless of circumstances, mood, or external conditions. Most people's performance fluctuates wildly based on factors outside their control. They perform well when they feel motivated, when conditions are favorable, and when they're in a good mood. But they struggle when motivation wanes, when challenges arise, or when they don't feel like doing the work. Winners understand that waiting for motivation is an amateur approach to performance. Motivation is unreliable because it's based on emotions, and emotions constantly change based on circumstances. Professional athletes don't wait until they feel like training. Successful entrepreneurs don't wait until they feel motivated to work on their business. Elite performers in every field have learned to generate consistent output regardless of their emotional state. This requires building what psychologists call self-regulation, the ability to control your behavior, emotions, and attention in service of your long-term goals. Self-regulation is like a muscle that can be strengthened through practice, but it also gets depleted through use. This is why winners focus on building systems and habits that minimize the amount of self-regulation required for peak performance. The foundation of consistent performance is creating environmental and structural supports that make success easier and failure harder. This means designing your physical environment to eliminate distractions and provide cues for productive behavior. It means creating scheduling structures that allocate your highest energy periods to your most important work. It means building accountability systems that make it painful to underperform and rewarding to follow through on commitments. Winners also understand the principle of energy management over time management. You can't manage time, but you can manage your energy and attention. They identify their natural energy rhythms and schedule their most demanding work during peak energy periods. They protect their mental energy by eliminating unnecessary decisions, reducing context switching, and batching similar activities together. Mental energy is consumed by decisions, conflicts, and cognitive load. Every choice you make, every temptation you resist, and every task that requires intense focus depletes your mental energy reserves. This is why successful people often have very structured routines that eliminate trivial decisions. They wear similar clothes, eat similar foods, and follow similar schedules not because they lack creativity, but because they're preserving mental energy for the decisions that matter. Consistent peak performance also requires understanding and managing your attention as your most valuable resource. In an era of constant distractions, the ability to focus deeply on important work has become a rare and valuable skill. Most people's attention has been hijacked by social media, notifications, and the constant stimulation of modern life. Their minds have become addicted to novelty and variety, making sustained focus feel uncomfortable and difficult. Winners treat attention like a finite resource that must be protected and strategically deployed. They create distraction-free environments during focused work periods. They use techniques like time blocking to batch similar activities and minimize context switching. They practice meditation or other attention training exercises to strengthen their ability to sustain focus over longer periods. They also understand the difference between focus and flow states. Focus requires effort and self-regulation to maintain attention on a specific task. Flow states occur when you're fully immersed in activity that perfectly matches your skill level to the challenge level. In flow, performance feels effortless, and time seems to disappear. Winners learn to structure their work to create more opportunities for flow states while building the focus capacity to push through less engaging but necessary tasks. Peak performance psychology also involves managing the internal dialogue that runs through your mind during challenging moments. Most people have internal critics that become loudest exactly when they need confidence. This inner voice points out everything that could go wrong, reminds them of past failures, and creates doubt about their ability to succeed. Winners learn to notice this internal dialogue without being controlled by it. Instead of trying to eliminate negative self-talk, which usually makes it stronger, they learn to change their relationship with it. They develop what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, thinking about thinking. They notice when their minds are generating unhelpful thoughts and choose not to engage with those thoughts emotionally. They understand that you don't have to believe every thought you think, and you don't have to act on every emotion you feel. This requires developing a different identity around performance. Most people see performance as something that happens to them based on external circumstances. Winners see performance as something they create through their choices, preparation, and mental management. They take responsibility for their mental state and develop the skills to perform at their best regardless of conditions. Chapter 6. Advanced mental models for complex situations. Most people navigate complex situations using intuition, emotion, or simple cause and effect thinking. They see the world in black and white terms, looking for single causes and simple solutions to multifaceted problems. This approach works fine for straightforward situations, but it completely breaks down when dealing with the complex, interconnected challenges that determine success in business, relationships, and life. Winners understand that complex situations require sophisticated mental models, frameworks for understanding how different variables interact, how systems behave over time, and how to make decisions when there are multiple stakeholders with competing interests. Mental models are thinking tools that help you understand how the world works and predict the consequences of different actions. They're like maps that help you navigate unfamiliar territory. Just as physical maps show you the terrain, roads, and obstacles in a geographic area, mental models show you the patterns, relationships, and dynamics in whatever situation you're trying to understand. The quality of your mental models determines the quality of your decisions, and the quality of your decisions determines the quality of your outcomes. Average people operate with a limited set of mental models that they picked up unconsciously through experience. They think in terms of linear cause and effect. If I do this, then that will happen. They assume that correlation implies causation. They believe that good intentions lead to good results. They expect that working harder always produces better outcomes. These simple models work in simple situations, but they lead to costly mistakes when applied to complex systems. Winners deliberately study and collect sophisticated mental models from multiple disciplines: psychology, economics, biology, physics, game theory, and systems thinking. They understand that the same underlying patterns appear across different domains. So a model from biology might help you understand business dynamics, or a concept from physics might illuminate relationship patterns. This cross-pollination of ideas gives them insights that people who think within single disciplines miss completely. One of the most powerful mental models for complex situations is systems thinking. Understanding how different components of a system interact with each other over time. Most people focus on events and try to find single causes for outcomes they don't like. Systems thinkers focus on patterns and structures that create those events. They ask not just, "What happened?" but "What patterns led to this outcome?" and What structural changes would prevent this problem from recurring? Systems thinking reveals that most problems are symptoms of deeper structural issues. If your business is losing customers, the surface problem might be poor customer service. But the systems problem might be that your compensation structure rewards employees for making sales rather than creating customer satisfaction, or that your training program doesn't teach people how to handle complaints effectively. Fixing the surface problem with better customer service training might provide temporary improvement, but the underlying system will continue creating the same problems. Another essential mental model is second-order thinking. Considering not just the immediate consequences of your actions, but the consequences of those consequences. Most people stop their analysis at first-order effects. If I lower my prices, I'll sell more products. Second-order thinking asks, what happens after I sell more products? Will lower prices reduce my profit margins? Will customers perceive lower prices as indicating lower quality? Will competitors respond by lowering their prices too? What happens if a price war starts? This type of thinking prevents unintended consequences that often make situations worse despite good intentions. The classic example is the Cobra effect, named after a colonial policy in India that offered payment for dead cobras to reduce the cobra population. People responded by breeding cobras to kill for the bounty, actually increasing the cobra population. The immediate effect of the policy was what policymakers wanted. But the second-order effect was the opposite of their intention. Winners also use probabilistic thinking instead of deterministic thinking. Average people think in terms of certainty. This will definitely happen, or that definitely won't work. Probabilistic thinking recognizes that most outcomes involve uncertainty and focuses on estimating the likelihood of different scenarios. Instead of asking, will this work? Winners ask, what's the probability this will work? And how does that compare to other options? This shift in thinking leads to better decision-making under uncertainty. Instead of avoiding situations where you can't predict the outcome with certainty, you learn to make decisions based on expected value. The probability of different outcomes multiplied by the consequences of each outcome. A decision with a 30% chance of extraordinary success and 70% chance of manageable failure might be better than a decision with 90% chance of modest success and 10% chance of modest failure. Inversion is another powerful mental model that involves approaching problems backwards. Instead of asking, how can I succeed? You ask, how could I fail? And how can I avoid those failure modes? Instead of asking, what should I do? You ask, what should I definitely not do? Inversion helps you identify hidden risks and constraints that forward thinking might miss. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner, attributes much of his success to inversion thinking. Winners also understand the principle of optionality, structuring situations to benefit from positive, unexpected events, while limiting exposure to negative, unexpected events. This involves making decisions that give you multiple paths forward rather than committing to single courses of action. Instead of betting everything on one opportunity, you create a portfolio of opportunities where each has limited downside but significant upside potential. The mental model of competitive dynamics helps winners understand how other people's decisions affect your outcomes. Most people make decisions in isolation, as if they're the only person making strategic choices. But in competitive environments, your success depends not just on what you do, but on what others do in response to what you do. Game theory provides frameworks for thinking about these multiplayer situations where everyone's decisions affect everyone else's outcomes. Understanding competitive dynamics prevents the mistake of optimizing for current conditions without considering how those conditions might change in response to your actions. If you discover a profitable market opportunity, you need to consider how quickly competitors will notice and respond. If you develop a competitive advantage, you need to think about how sustainable that advantage will be as others try to copy or neutralize it. Chapter 7. Emotional Mastery Under Pressure. Pressure reveals who you really are. When the stakes are high, deadlines are looming, and everything feels uncertain, your true character emerges. Most people's performance degrades under pressure because their emotions take control of their decision-making. Fear makes them hesitant and conservative. Anger makes them reactive and reckless. Anxiety makes them overthink and second-guess themselves. Excitement makes them impulsive and careless. Winners understand that emotional mastery isn't about eliminating emotions, it's about maintaining access to your highest-level thinking even when emotions are intense. The first step in emotional mastery is understanding how emotions affect your cognitive capabilities. When you're in an intense emotional state, your brain prioritizes speed over accuracy. The amygdala, which processes emotional threats, can hijack your prefrontal cortex, which handles complex reasoning. This emotional hijacking made sense from an evolutionary perspective when quick reactions to physical threats meant the difference between life and death. But in modern situations, emotional reactions usually make problems worse rather than better. Emotional hijacking doesn't just affect your thinking. It affects what information you notice and remember. When you're anxious, you become hypervigilant for threats and miss opportunities. When you're angry, you focus on what's wrong and miss what's working. When you're excited, you focus on potential rewards and miss potential risks. Each emotional state acts like a filter that determines what data reaches your conscious awareness. Winners develop emotional awareness, the ability to recognize emotional intensity as it's building rather than after it's taken control. Most people only notice their emotions after they're already fully activated and affecting their behavior. By then, it's much harder to regain cognitive control. Emotional awareness involves paying attention to early warning signs. Changes in your breathing, muscle tension, thought patterns, or attention focus that indicate emotional intensity is increasing. The key insight is that there's always a gap between the trigger that starts an emotional response and the point where that emotion takes control of your behavior. Most people experience this gap as instantaneous, but with practice, you can learn to recognize and extend this gap. In that extended gap, you have the opportunity to choose how to respond rather than reacting automatically. Developing this gap requires understanding the physiology of emotional responses. When you encounter a trigger, your sympathetic nervous system activates, releasing stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones prepare your body for fight or flight by increasing heart rate, blood pressure, and muscle tension while decreasing complex cognitive processing. The entire response happens within milliseconds, but it takes several minutes for the hormones to clear your system even after the trigger is gone. This is why people often say things in anger that they regret later, or make fear-based decisions that seem obviously wrong in retrospect. The emotional chemistry in their brains was still affecting their judgment, even though the immediate trigger had passed. Understanding this physiological process helps you recognize that intense emotions are temporary chemical states, not accurate reflections of reality. Winners use several techniques to maintain cognitive control under emotional pressure. The first is physiological regulation, using breathing, movement, and posture to influence your emotional state. Deep, slow breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts the stress response. Changing your posture from collapsed and defensive to upright and open sends signals to your brain that you're in control rather than threatened. The second technique is cognitive reframing, changing how you interpret triggering situations to reduce emotional intensity. Instead of seeing pressure situations as threats to be avoided, you can reframe them as opportunities to prove your capabilities. Instead of seeing criticism as personal attacks, you can reframe it as information for improvement. Instead of seeing setbacks as evidence that you're failing, you can reframe them as temporary obstacles that are building your resilience. Reframing works because emotions are largely determined by the meaning you assign to events, not the events themselves. The same situation can trigger completely different emotional responses depending on how you interpret what's happening and what it means about you, your capabilities, and your future prospects. Winners become skilled at choosing interpretations that preserve their sense of agency and possibility, even in difficult circumstances. The third technique is attention control, directing your focus toward elements of the situation that support clear thinking and effective action, rather than elements that trigger unproductive emotions. In any complex situation, there are multiple things you could focus on. You could focus on what's going wrong or what's going right. You could focus on factors outside your control or factors within your control. You could focus on worst-case scenarios or best-case scenarios. Winners don't ignore negative information or pretend problems don't exist, but they strategically direct their attention toward actionable information while limiting exposure to information that triggers unproductive emotional responses without providing actionable insights. They ask, "What do I need to focus on right now to move this situation forward?" And "What's the most useful way to think about this challenge?" Emotional mastery also involves developing what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to function effectively even when experiencing uncomfortable emotions. Most people try to avoid or immediately escape uncomfortable emotional states. They distract themselves, numb themselves with substances or activities, or make impulsive decisions just to relieve emotional discomfort quickly. This approach prevents them from handling situations that require persistence through temporary discomfort. Winners understand that some of the most important actions require doing things that feel uncomfortable in the short term but produce better outcomes in the long term. Having difficult conversations feels uncomfortable but improves relationships. Taking calculated risks feels scary but creates opportunities for breakthrough results. Maintaining discipline when motivation is low feels unpleasant but builds the consistency that leads to success. Distress tolerance involves accepting that discomfort is temporary and doesn't require immediate action to relieve it. You can feel anxious without avoiding challenging situations. You can feel angry without saying things you'll regret. You can feel disappointed without giving up on important goals. Emotions provide information about your current state, but they don't have to control your choices. Advanced emotional mastery involves learning to use emotions as sources of information and energy, rather than obstacles to performance. Fear often indicates that something is important to you and worth careful preparation. Anger can provide energy for addressing injustices or breaking through obstacles. Excitement can fuel sustained effort on challenging projects. Sadness can motivate deeper connections with others and more meaningful priorities. The highest level of emotional mastery is emotional alchemy, transforming potentially destructive emotions into fuel for exceptional performance. This requires shifting from seeing emotions as happening to you to seeing emotions as information you can use and energy you can direct. Champions in every field have learned to perform their best, not despite emotional intensity, but because of how they channel that intensity toward their objectives. Chapter 8. The daily systems that compound into dominance. Success isn't created by occasional bursts of intense effort or moments of brilliant insight. Success is created by small, consistent actions that compound over time into extraordinary results. Most people focus on goals, events, and outcomes while neglecting the daily systems that actually create those outcomes. They set ambitious targets, but don't build the daily practices that would make achieving those targets inevitable. Winners understand that you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. A system is a collection of processes, habits, and structures that work together to produce consistent results. While goals are about the results you want to achieve, systems are about the processes that lead to those results. Goals provide direction, but systems provide progress. The problem with focusing primarily on goals is that goals are achieved through sporadic effort, while systems create continuous improvement. When you focus on systems instead of just goals, you create what mathematicians call exponential growth rather than linear growth. Linear growth means making the same amount of progress each day. If you improve 1% daily through linear growth, you improve 365% in a year. Exponential growth means your progress compounds. If you improve 1% daily through exponential growth, you improve 778% in a year. The difference between linear and exponential growth is the difference between incremental improvement and complete transformation. The key to exponential growth is understanding compound effects. Small improvements in multiple areas of your performance don't just add together, they multiply each other. If you improve your decision-making by 10%, your focus by 10%, and your energy management by 10%, your overall performance doesn't improve by 30%. It improves by 33.1% because 1.1 times 1.1 times 1.1 equals 1.331. This might seem like a small difference, but it compounds dramatically over time. Winners build systems around the activities that have the highest compound potential. Activities that don't just produce immediate results, but also increase your capacity to produce better results in the future. Reading builds knowledge that improves all future decisions. Exercise builds energy and mental clarity that improve all other activities. Building relationships creates opportunities and support systems that accelerate all other goals. Learning new skills increases your ability to create value and solve problems. The foundation of any effective system is establishing non-negotiable daily practices that advance your most important objectives, regardless of circumstances, mood, or competing demands. These practices become automatic through repetition, requiring minimal willpower or decision-making energy to maintain. The key is starting with practices that are small enough to be sustainable, but significant enough to create meaningful progress over time. Most people fail to build sustainable systems because they try to change too much too quickly. They create elaborate morning routines, commit to exercising for hours daily, or pledge to read for several hours every night. These ambitious plans feel inspiring initially, but they require more willpower than most people can sustain consistently. When willpower fails, the entire system collapses, creating a cycle of starting and stopping that prevents real progress. Winners use the principle of minimum viable habits, identifying the smallest version of a practice that still moves you forward, then building consistency around that minimal version before expanding. Instead of committing to exercise for an hour daily, start with 5 minutes daily. Instead of reading for an hour, start with 1 page. Instead of meditating for 30 minutes, start with 2 minutes. The goal is to establish the neural pathways and identity associated with the practice, not to achieve significant results immediately. Once the minimal version becomes automatic, you can gradually expand without requiring additional willpower. The person who consistently exercises for 5 minutes daily can easily expand to 10 minutes because they've already established the habit of daily exercise. The person who reads 1 page daily has already overcome the resistance to reading and can gradually increase to multiple pages or chapters. Effective systems also include tracking mechanisms that provide clear feedback about progress and consistency. What gets measured gets managed. And measurement creates accountability, even when external accountability isn't available. Winners track both leading indicators and lagging indicators. Leading indicators are activities that predict future results. How many sales calls you made? How many hours you spent learning new skills? How consistently you followed your morning routine. Lagging indicators are the results those activities produce. Revenue generated, skills acquired, energy levels improved. Tracking leading indicators is more important than tracking lagging indicators because leading indicators are directly under your control, while lagging indicators are influenced by many factors beyond your actions. You can control how many sales calls you make. You can't directly control how many sales you close. You can control how consistently you exercise. You can't directly control how quickly you lose weight or build muscle. The most sophisticated systems include feedback loops that allow you to continuously optimize your practices based on results. Instead of rigidly following the same routine regardless of outcomes, winners regularly assess what's working, what's not working, and what could be improved. They treat their systems as experiments that can be refined rather than fixed procedures that must be followed exactly. This requires building regular review periods into your system. Weekly assessments of what progress was made and what obstacles were encountered. Monthly evaluations of whether current practices are producing desired outcomes, and quarterly deeper analyses of whether the overall system needs structural changes. These reviews prevent the common mistake of persistently following ineffective practices just because they've become habitual. Winners also understand the importance of designing their environment to support their systems rather than working against them. Your physical and social environment has enormous influence over your behavior, often more influence than your conscious willpower. If you want to eat healthier food, fill your kitchen with healthy options and remove unhealthy ones. If you want to read more, place books in visible locations and remove distracting alternatives. If you want to exercise consistently, Prepare your workout clothes the night before and remove barriers that make exercise inconvenient. Environmental design extends beyond physical spaces to include social environments. The people you spend time with significantly influence your standards, beliefs, and behaviors through social proof and peer pressure. Winners deliberately cultivate relationships with people who model the behaviors and mindsets they want to develop, while limiting exposure to people who reinforce patterns they want to change. The ultimate goal of building systems is to create what psychologists call automaticity, performing important behaviors without requiring conscious decision-making or willpower. When beneficial behaviors become automatic, they happen regardless of motivation, circumstances, or competing demands. This frees up your mental energy for higher-level strategic thinking and creative problem-solving, rather than constantly battling yourself to do things you know are important. Chapter 9. Social Intelligence and Influence Psychology. Success in any field ultimately depends on your ability to work effectively with other people. No meaningful achievement happens in isolation. Whether you're building a business, advancing in your career, or creating something meaningful, you need other people's cooperation, support, and resources. Yet most people approach social interactions reactively, hoping others will like them and help them without understanding the psychological principles that actually drive human behavior. Winners study social dynamics systematically and develop sophisticated skills for understanding, connecting with, and influencing others. Social intelligence starts with understanding that every person you interact with is primarily concerned with their own interests, challenges, and objectives. This isn't selfishness, it's human nature. People don't wake up thinking about how to help you achieve your goals. They wake up thinking about their own problems, opportunities, and priorities. The fastest way to build rapport and influence with others is to understand their world from their perspective and find ways to align your interests with theirs. This requires developing what psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and motivations that are different from your own. Most people assume others think the same way they do, value the same things they value, and are motivated by the same factors that motivate them. This assumption leads to communication failures and influence attempts that backfire because they're based on what would convince you rather than what would convince the other person. Winners become students of individual psychology. They pay attention to what each person talks about, what they avoid talking about, what energizes them, what frustrates them, what they value, and what they fear. They notice whether someone is motivated more by gaining rewards or avoiding risks, whether they prefer detailed analysis or big-picture thinking, whether they make decisions quickly or need time to process information, and whether they're influenced more by logic or emotions. Understanding individual differences allows you to adapt your communication style to match each person's preferences and decision-making processes. When talking to analytical people, you lead with data, logic, and systematic reasoning. When talking to emotional people, you focus on feelings, relationships, and personal impact. When talking to action-oriented people, you emphasize results, efficiency, and practical benefits. When talking to relationship-oriented people, you emphasize collaboration, consensus, and mutual benefit. Beyond individual psychology, winners understand group dynamics and social proof. People's behavior changes dramatically when they're in groups compared to when they're alone. In groups, people often defer to perceived authorities, follow what seems to be the group consensus, and suppress their individual preferences to maintain social acceptance. Understanding these dynamics allows you to structure social situations to encourage the behaviors and decisions you want. Social proof is one of the most powerful influence principles. People look to the behavior of others to determine what's appropriate in uncertain situations. If you want someone to adopt a new behavior, showing them that similar people are already engaging in that behavior is more persuasive than logical arguments about why they should change. If you want someone to support your initiative, demonstrating that respected people they know have already endorsed it creates momentum in your favor. Winners also understand the principle of reciprocity. People feel obligated to return favors and gestures of goodwill. But reciprocity works most effectively when it's genuine rather than manipulative. Instead of doing favors to create obligations, focus on genuinely helping people achieve their objectives. When you consistently add value to others' lives without immediate expectation of return, you build relationship capital that creates long-term influence and support. The key to effective reciprocity is understanding that different people value different types of assistance. Some people most appreciate help with practical problems. Others value introductions to useful contacts. Some want recognition and public acknowledgement. Others prefer private support and encouragement. Some value expert advice and feedback. Others want resources, tools, or information. Winners identify what each person would find most valuable and find ways to provide that specific type of value. Authority and credibility are essential foundations for influence. People are more likely to be persuaded by individuals they perceive as competent, trustworthy, and knowledgeable. But authority isn't just about credentials or formal positions. It's about demonstrating expertise through your knowledge, insights, and track record of success. Winners build credibility by consistently delivering on commitments, providing valuable insights, and demonstrating competence in their actions and decisions. Credibility is built through small, consistent actions over time, rather than grand gestures. Being punctual builds credibility. Following through on small commitments builds credibility. Providing accurate information builds credibility. Acknowledging mistakes and limitations builds credibility. Taking responsibility for outcomes builds credibility. These behaviors signal that you can be trusted with bigger responsibilities and more important decisions. Winners also understand the psychology of commitment and consistency. People have a strong psychological need to appear consistent with their previous statements, decisions, and public commitments. Once someone commits to a position publicly, they become psychologically invested in defending that position, even when presented with contradictory evidence. This means getting someone to make small commitments that align with your objectives creates momentum toward larger commitments. The most effective commitments are those that people make voluntarily rather than being pressured into. Instead of telling people what they should do, skilled influencers ask questions that lead people to conclude for themselves that certain actions make sense. Instead of presenting fully formed solutions, they involve others in developing solutions so those people feel ownership of the ideas. People support what they help, create much more enthusiastically than what's imposed on them. Advanced social intelligence involves understanding power dynamics and positioning yourself strategically within social and organizational hierarchies. Every group has formal and informal power structures, that determine whose opinions matter most, who has access to important information, and who can influence key decisions. Winners identify these power structures and build relationships with influential individuals rather than just focusing on people they personally like or who are easy to access. This doesn't mean being manipulative or political in negative ways. It means recognizing that influence flows through networks of relationships and positioning yourself where you can contribute value to important people and important initiatives. Sometimes this means building relationships with people who control resources you need. Sometimes it means aligning yourself with successful projects that will enhance your reputation. Sometimes it means becoming known for specific expertise that others need. The highest level of social intelligence is creating win-win scenarios where helping others achieve their objectives simultaneously advances your own objectives. This requires creativity and systems thinking to identify opportunities where collaboration creates more value for everyone involved than individual effort would create for each person separately. When you become known as someone who creates mutual benefit rather than pursuing zero-sum competitions, people actively seek opportunities to work with you. Chapter 10. The compound effect of mental superiority. Everything we've discussed in this audiobook compounds. Each mental upgrade amplifies every other mental upgrade. Improving your decision-making framework makes your emotional mastery more effective because you're making better choices about how to respond to emotional triggers. Developing better mental models helps you build more effective systems because you understand how different variables interact over time. Building anti-fragility increases your social intelligence because you're more willing to engage in challenging conversations and difficult situations that build stronger relationships. This compound effect explains why some people seem to improve exponentially while others remain stuck at the same level despite working hard. Small mental advantages compound into enormous practical advantages over time. Someone who makes slightly better decisions consistently will end up in completely different circumstances than someone who makes slightly worse decisions consistently, even if they start from the same place and work equally hard. The mathematics of compounding are counterintuitive because the effects start small and accelerate over time. If two people start with equal abilities but one improves 1% daily while the other improves 0.5% daily, the difference seems negligible initially. After 1 year, the person improving 1% daily is 37.8 times better than they started, while the person improving 0.5% daily is only 6 times better. After 5 years, the gap becomes astronomical. The 1% person is 1,469 times better, while the 0.5% person is only 181 times better. This compounding effect applies to every aspect of mental performance. Small improvements in focus compound into massive advantages in productivity. Small improvements in emotional regulation compound into dramatically better relationships and leadership capabilities. Small improvements in strategic thinking compound into vastly superior life outcomes. The key is understanding that every mental upgrade is an investment that pays dividends across every other area of your performance. Winners understand that developing mental superiority is like building a high-performance engine that makes everything else in your life more effective. Once you have the mental frameworks, emotional skills, and systematic approaches we've covered, every goal becomes easier to achieve, every challenge becomes easier to navigate, and every opportunity becomes easier to capitalize on. You're not just improving specific skills, you're upgrading the operating system that runs everything else. The compound effect also means that early investments in mental development pay the highest returns. The sooner you begin implementing these frameworks and building these capabilities, the longer you have to benefit from compound growth. Someone who develops superior mental models at age 25 has 40+ years to benefit from better decision-making. Someone who builds emotional mastery early has decades to leverage better relationships and leadership capabilities. But compounding works in both directions. Just as positive mental habits compound into extraordinary results, negative mental habits compound into increasingly limiting outcomes. Mental patterns that seem harmless in the short term can create devastating long-term consequences through compound effects. Procrastination that costs you 1 hour today compounds into missed opportunities, reduced capabilities, and weakened credibility over time. Poor decision-making that creates small problems today compounds into increasingly complex challenges that become harder to resolve. This is why mental superiority isn't just an advantage, it's a necessity for anyone who wants to achieve significant success. In competitive environments, falling behind mentally means falling behind exponentially. People with superior mental frameworks don't just perform slightly better. They operate in entirely different categories of effectiveness. They see opportunities others miss, solve problems others can't handle, and create value others can't imagine. The compound effect of mental superiority also extends beyond individual performance to impact everyone around you. When you develop superior mental capabilities, you become more valuable to everyone you interact with. You provide better advice, make better decisions for teams and organizations, and create more opportunities for others. This creates positive feedback loops where others want to work with you, support your initiatives, and provide you with resources and opportunities. People with mental superiority attract other high performers because they can contribute meaningfully to challenging projects and complex problems. They gain access to exclusive opportunities that are only offered to people who have demonstrated exceptional capabilities. They build networks with other individuals who operate at high levels, creating compound effects through association and collaboration. Understanding the compound effect changes how you think about effort and improvement. Instead of looking for quick fixes or dramatic breakthroughs, you focus on consistent, small improvements that accumulate over time. Instead of trying to change everything at once, you identify the highest leverage mental upgrades that will amplify everything else you do. The highest leverage improvements are usually in areas where you're currently weakest rather than areas where you're already strong. If you're great at strategic thinking but poor at emotional regulation, improving emotional regulation will have more compound impact than becoming even better at strategy. If you're excellent at individual performance but weak at social influence, developing social intelligence will unlock opportunities that pure individual capability can't access. Mental superiority also creates what economists call increasing returns. The more you develop these capabilities, the easier it becomes to develop them further. Learning accelerates learning because better mental models help you understand new information faster. Emotional mastery makes it easier to handle the discomfort of pushing beyond your current capabilities. Social intelligence provides access to mentors, resources, and opportunities that accelerate further development. This means that developing mental superiority is like climbing a mountain where each step up makes the next step easier rather than harder. The beginning requires the most effort, because you're working against old patterns and building new capabilities from scratch. But once you reach critical mass, improvement becomes self-sustaining because you have the mental tools to continue learning, growing, and optimizing systematically. The ultimate compound effect of mental superiority is that it becomes part of your identity rather than something you have to consciously maintain. When these mental frameworks become automatic, you don't have to remember to think strategically, regulate your emotions, or influence others effectively. These capabilities become integrated into who you are and how you naturally operate. At this level, mental superiority creates effortless excellence, where your default behaviors produce extraordinary results. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it's inevitable if you consistently apply these principles and frameworks. Every decision to think more strategically, every moment you choose emotional regulation over emotional reaction, every time you apply systematic thinking to complex problems, you're reinforcing neural pathways that make mental superiority more natural and automatic. The question isn't whether these principles work. The question is whether you'll commit to implementing them consistently enough to experience their compound effects. Mental superiority is available to anyone willing to study how their mind works and deliberately upgrade their mental capabilities. The frameworks exist. The science is proven. The only variable is your commitment to applying them consistently over time until they become automatic. Chapter 11. The Psychology of Mastery and Continuous Improvement. Mastery isn't a destination you reach. It's a mindset you embody. Most people think mastery means becoming so skilled at something that you no longer need to practice or improve. They imagine reaching a level where everything becomes effortless and you can coast on your accumulated expertise. This fundamental misunderstanding of mastery explains why most people plateau long before reaching their potential. True mastery is characterized not by the absence of challenge, but by the embrace of increasingly sophisticated challenges that continue pushing you beyond your current capabilities. The psychology of mastery begins with understanding that expertise creates new problems rather than eliminating problems altogether. When you become competent at basic skills, you gain access to advanced challenges that were previously invisible or impossible. A beginning chess player struggles with basic piece movements and simple tactics. An intermediate player faces complex strategic decisions and positional understanding. A master deals with psychological warfare, preparation depth, and theoretical innovations that beginners can't even comprehend. This pattern appears across every domain of human achievement. Beginning entrepreneurs struggle with basic business operations like sales, marketing, and cash flow management. Successful entrepreneurs face challenges like scaling culture, managing complex partnerships, and navigating regulatory environments. Elite entrepreneurs deal with global market dynamics, technological disruption, and legacy management issues that most people never encounter. Understanding this progression prevents the frustration that kills most improvement efforts. Many people become discouraged when advancing to higher levels creates new difficulties. Instead of making everything easier, they interpret increased challenge as evidence that they're not really improving or that they've chosen the wrong path. Masters understand that increased challenge is evidence of progress, not lack of progress. More sophisticated problems indicate that you've developed the capabilities necessary to engage with more sophisticated work. The master's mindset involves what psychologists call a growth orientation rather than a performance orientation. Performance-oriented individuals focus on demonstrating their current abilities and avoiding situations where they might fail or look incompetent. Growth-oriented individuals focus on expanding their abilities and actively seek situations where failure is possible because that's where learning happens most rapidly. This orientation affects how you interpret setbacks, criticism, and competition. Performance-oriented people see failures as evidence of their limitations and criticism as attacks on their competence. Growth-oriented people see failures as information about what needs improvement, and criticism as data for optimization. Performance-oriented people view competitors as threats to their status. Growth-oriented people view competitors as standards to exceed and sources of insight about what's possible. Masters also develop what researchers call deliberate practice, focused, systematic practice that targets specific weaknesses and pushes beyond current comfort zones. Most people engage in what could be called naive practice, repeating activities they're already comfortable with rather than working on skills that are currently difficult. Naive practice feels productive because you're busy and active, but it doesn't create significant improvement because it's not challenging your current limitations. Deliberate practice requires several components that most people avoid because they make practice less comfortable. First, it requires accurate self-assessment to identify precisely what skills need improvement. Most people prefer to work on things they're already good at, rather than confronting areas where they're weak. Second, it requires designing practice sessions that specifically target those weaknesses, even when working on weaknesses feels frustrating and progress seems slow. Third, deliberate practice requires immediate, accurate feedback about performance. Most people practice in isolation or in environments where they don't receive honest assessment of their performance. They develop confidence in skills that aren't actually as strong as they believe, creating a false sense of competence that prevents further improvement. Masters actively seek feedback from credible sources who can identify flaws that they can't see themselves. Fourth, deliberate practice requires sustained concentration over extended periods. The mental effort required to work consistently at the edge of your capabilities is exhausting, which is why most people avoid it. They prefer practicing things that feel easy and comfortable rather than engaging in the focused, demanding work that actually drives improvement. The psychology of continuous improvement also involves understanding how expertise changes your relationship with uncertainty and complexity. Beginners prefer clear rules, step-by-step instructions, and predictable outcomes. They want to know exactly what to do in every situation and feel uncomfortable when facing ambiguous decisions. Masters become comfortable with uncertainty and develop the ability to make good decisions with incomplete information. This comfort with uncertainty allows masters to operate effectively in complex, rapidly changing environments where beginners would be paralyzed by indecision. Instead of waiting for perfect information or clear instructions, masters gather the best available information, make decisions based on their understanding of underlying principles, and adjust based on feedback from results. Masters also develop metacognitive skills, thinking about thinking. They become aware of their own mental processes and can consciously adjust their approach based on what the situation requires. They notice when they're falling into unproductive thought patterns and can redirect their mental energy toward more useful activities. They recognize when they're operating from habit rather than conscious choice and can deliberately engage different cognitive strategies. This metacognitive awareness extends to understanding their own learning processes. Masters know what conditions help them learn most effectively what types of practice produce the fastest improvement, and what mental states optimize their performance. They become skilled at managing their own development, rather than hoping that improvement will happen automatically through experience alone. Advanced mastery involves developing what experts call chunking, the ability to recognize complex patterns as single units rather than collections of individual components. Masters in any field can quickly identify meaningful patterns that beginners miss entirely. Chess masters see board positions as strategic themes rather than arrangements of individual pieces. Expert doctors recognize symptom patterns that indicate specific conditions. Elite athletes anticipate opponents' actions based on subtle cues that novices don't notice. Chunking dramatically increases processing speed and reduces cognitive load, allowing masters to handle much more complex situations than people who are analyzing everything at the component level. But chunking develops only through extensive exposure to patterns within specific domains. This is why expertise doesn't transfer easily between fields. The pattern recognition skills that make someone a master in one area don't automatically apply to different areas. The highest levels of mastery involve creative contributions that advance entire fields rather than just achieving personal excellence within existing frameworks. Masters at this level don't just apply existing knowledge, they generate new knowledge, develop innovative approaches, and establish new standards that others follow. This requires combining deep expertise with creative thinking and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom. Creative mastery often involves what researchers call bisociation, combining ideas, techniques, or principles from different fields to create novel solutions. Masters develop broad knowledge across multiple domains specifically to create opportunities for this type of creative combination. They understand that breakthrough innovations usually occur at the intersection of different fields rather than from incremental improvements within single disciplines. Chapter 12. Breaking through mental plateaus and limitations. Every person serious about mental development will encounter plateaus, periods where improvement seems to stop despite continued effort. These plateaus feel frustrating and often lead people to conclude that they've reached their natural limits or that further improvement is impossible. But plateaus are actually predictable parts of the development process, and understanding why they occur allows you to break through them systematically rather than being stopped by them. Mental plateaus occur for several reasons that most people don't understand. The first reason is that your brain becomes efficient at current skills and stops creating new neural pathways. When you first learn something new, your brain creates multiple neural pathways as it figures out how to perform the new skill. As you practice, your brain identifies the most efficient pathways and strengthens those, while allowing unused pathways to weaken. This optimization makes current performance more automatic and less energy-intensive, but it also makes further improvement more difficult because you're no longer forcing your brain to develop new capabilities. The second reason for plateaus is that continued improvement often requires qualitatively different approaches rather than just more of the same effort. The strategies that take you from beginner to intermediate are usually different from the strategies that take you from intermediate to advanced. Many people plateau because they keep using approaches that worked earlier in their development but are no longer sufficient for the next level of improvement. The third reason is that higher levels of performance often require developing completely new categories of skills, rather than just improving existing skills. A salesperson might plateau because they've maximized their current persuasion techniques and now need to develop deeper psychological understanding. An entrepreneur might plateau because they've optimized their current business model and now need to develop strategic thinking skills for entering new markets. Breaking through plateaus requires first recognizing that you're in one. Many people don't notice plateaus because they mistake activity for progress. They're still busy, still working hard, and still engaged with their development. But they're not actually improving. The clearest sign of a plateau is that your performance has remained essentially unchanged for an extended period despite continued effort. Once you've identified a plateau, the next step is diagnosing what's causing it. This requires honest self-assessment and often external feedback from coaches, mentors, or peers who can identify limitations that you can't see yourself. The most common causes of plateaus are practicing the same skills repeatedly without increasing difficulty, avoiding areas where you're weak in favor of areas where you're strong, and using approaches that worked at earlier stages but aren't sophisticated enough for your current level. The first strategy for breaking plateaus is deliberately increasing difficulty and complexity in your practice. If you've been practicing the same types of problems or challenges repeatedly, you need to find harder problems that push beyond your current capabilities. If you've been working in familiar environments, you need to seek out unfamiliar situations that require adapting your skills to new contexts. This often means temporarily accepting decreased performance as you work on more challenging material. Most people resist this approach because it feels like moving backward rather than forward. They prefer to continue doing things they can already do well, rather than struggling with things that expose their current limitations. But temporary performance decreases are often necessary for long-term improvement because they force your brain to develop new capabilities. The second strategy is identifying and specifically targeting your weakest skills rather than continuing to develop your strongest skills. This requires overcoming the natural tendency to work on things you enjoy and are good at rather than things that are difficult and frustrating. Most people's weakest skills are weak precisely because they avoid practicing them, creating a cycle where weaknesses remain weak while strengths become stronger. Breaking this cycle requires systematic analysis of what capabilities your next level of performance demands and honest assessment of which of those capabilities you currently lack. Then you must design practice sessions that specifically target those missing capabilities, even when working on them feels uncomfortable and progress seems slow. The third strategy involves seeking out different types of feedback and learning environments. If you've been learning primarily through individual practice, you might need feedback from coaches or mentors. If you've been learning primarily through instruction, you might need real-world application where you face unpredictable challenges. If you've been learning in low-stakes environments, you might need high-stakes situations where mistakes have meaningful consequences. Different learning environments activate different aspects of your capabilities and reveal different types of limitations. The feedback you receive from coaches is different from the feedback you receive from real-world results, which is different from the feedback you receive from peers or competitors. Exposing yourself to multiple types of feedback often reveals blind spots that single feedback sources miss. Advanced plateau-breaking techniques involve questioning fundamental assumptions about how to approach your field of development. Sometimes plateaus occur because you've optimized within a particular framework or methodology. But the framework itself is limiting further progress. Breaking through requires stepping outside that framework and exploring completely different approaches. This might mean studying how experts in other fields approach similar challenges, learning from people who've achieved results through unconventional methods, or experimenting with techniques that seem contrary to conventional wisdom in your area. Innovation often comes from applying insights from one domain to challenges in a completely different domain. Mental plateaus are also often caused by psychological factors, rather than just skill limitations. Fear of failure can prevent you from attempting challenges that would drive improvement. Perfectionism can keep you practicing safe, familiar skills, rather than risking mistakes on harder material. Identity attachments can make it difficult to adopt new approaches that contradict how you see yourself or how others see you. Breaking through psychological plateaus requires addressing these mental barriers directly. This might involve reframing your relationship with failure, developing comfort with temporary confusion and incompetence, or updating your identity to accommodate new ways of thinking and operating. Sometimes the biggest barrier to improvement isn't skill-related, but psychological resistance to becoming different than who you currently are. The most sophisticated approach to plateau breaking involves developing what researchers call transfer skills, the ability to apply insights and capabilities developed in one area to completely different areas. Instead of just becoming better within specific domains, you learn to extract underlying principles and patterns that apply across multiple domains. This creates accelerated learning in new areas because you can leverage insights from previous development rather than starting from scratch. Transfer skills develop through deliberate practice of looking for similarities between different domains, experimenting with applying techniques from familiar areas to unfamiliar areas, and developing abstract models that capture essential principles rather than just surface-level techniques. Masters in any field typically have strong transfer skills that allow them to quickly develop competence in related fields. Breaking through plateaus ultimately requires accepting that continued growth demands moving outside your comfort zone repeatedly throughout your development. Plateaus are often signals that you've become too comfortable with your current approach and need to embrace higher levels of challenge, uncertainty, and temporary incompetence. The willingness to repeatedly move from competence back into incompetence in service of continued growth is what separates people who keep improving throughout their lives from people who plateau and stagnate. Chapter 13. Leadership through mental superiority. Leadership isn't about authority, charisma, or position. Leadership is about mental clarity that enables you to see solutions others can't see, make decisions others can't make, and maintain effectiveness when others are overwhelmed by complexity or pressure. Everything we've discussed about developing mental superiority becomes exponentially more powerful when applied to leadership because your mental capabilities don't just improve your individual performance, they improve the performance of everyone you influence. The foundation of leadership through mental superiority is understanding that people follow clarity, not authority. In uncertain, complex, or high-pressure situations, people naturally gravitate toward whoever seems to understand what's happening and knows what to do. This gravitational pull toward clarity occurs regardless of formal titles, organizational hierarchies, or established power structures. The person who can make sense of confusion and provide direction becomes the de facto leader. Whether or not they have official leadership authority, mental superiority creates this clarity through several mechanisms that most people don't understand. Superior mental models allow you to see patterns and connections that others miss. When everyone else is overwhelmed by complexity, you can identify the key variables and relationships that actually matter. When others are paralyzed by uncertainty, you can make decisions based on probabilistic thinking and strategic frameworks, rather than hoping for perfect information. Emotional mastery allows you to maintain cognitive effectiveness when others are hijacked by stress, fear, or excitement. This creates a stark contrast in environments where most people's thinking deteriorates under pressure. Your ability to remain calm, think clearly, and make good decisions when stakes are high makes you invaluable to any group or organization facing challenges. Advanced decision-making frameworks enable you to choose courses of action that others wouldn't consider or wouldn't have confidence to pursue. You can see multiple levels of consequences, balance competing priorities, and structure decisions to limit downside while maximizing upside. This capability becomes especially valuable in leadership situations where decisions affect multiple people and have lasting consequences. The social intelligence components we discussed allow you to understand, predict, and influence how others will respond to different approaches. You can frame ideas in ways that create buy-in rather than resistance. You can identify what motivates each individual and structure interactions to align their interests with group objectives. You can build coalitions and manage conflicts in ways that strengthen rather than weaken team effectiveness. But leadership through mental superiority requires understanding that your role shifts from individual performer to capability multiplier. Instead of just using your mental advantages for personal achievement, you must learn to transfer those advantages to others and create systems that amplify group intelligence rather than just individual intelligence. This begins with developing others' thinking capabilities rather than just telling them what to do. Most leaders focus on directing actions, assigning tasks, setting deadlines, and monitoring compliance. Leaders with mental superiority focus on upgrading others' decision-making frameworks, mental models, and problem-solving capabilities. Instead of being the person who always has the answers, you become the person who helps others develop better questions and thinking processes. This approach creates several advantages over traditional command and control leadership. First, it scales better because you're multiplying capabilities rather than just directing activities. Second, it creates more innovative solutions because you're leveraging multiple perspectives enhanced by better thinking tools rather than just implementing your individual ideas. Third, it builds organizational resilience because success doesn't depend entirely on your presence and decision-making. Advanced leadership involves creating what organizational theorists call learning systems, structures and processes that enable groups to continuously improve their collective intelligence and effectiveness. This requires understanding how information flows through organizations, how decisions get made at different levels, and how to design feedback loops that enable rapid learning and adaptation. Most organizations are designed for efficiency and control rather than learning and adaptation. They have rigid hierarchies that prevent information from flowing freely, standardized procedures that discourage experimentation, and accountability systems that punish mistakes rather than learning from them. Leaders with mental superiority redesign these structures to support collective intelligence development. This involves creating psychological safety, where people feel comfortable sharing information, admitting mistakes, and proposing ideas that might not work. It requires establishing feedback systems that provide rapid, accurate information about what's working and what isn't. It means designing decision-making processes that leverage diverse perspectives while still enabling decisive action when necessary. The highest form of leadership through mental superiority is developing others who eventually surpass your own capabilities. Most leaders feel threatened by subordinates who might become better than them. They hoard information, limit others' development opportunities, and structure organizations to maintain their indispensability. This approach severely limits organizational potential because it caps group performance at the leader's individual capabilities. Leaders with mental superiority understand that their legacy and impact come through multiplying capabilities rather than concentrating them. They actively work to develop others who can think more clearly, decide more effectively, and solve more complex problems. They create succession systems that ensure organizational capabilities continue improving even after they're no longer involved. This requires overcoming psychological barriers that prevent most people from developing others who might exceed their own abilities. It means shifting from an identity based on being the smartest person in the room to an identity based on creating rooms full of incredibly smart people. It involves finding satisfaction in others' achievements rather than just personal achievements. Mental superiority also enables what military strategists call force multiplication, achieving disproportionate results by optimizing how different capabilities work together. Instead of just adding individual contributions, you create synergies where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This requires understanding each person's unique strengths, designing roles that maximize those strengths, and creating interaction patterns that allow different capabilities to reinforce each other. Force multiplication often involves strategic positioning, where you place the right people in the right situations at the right times to maximize their impact. It requires timing coordination so that different efforts support each other rather than working at cross purposes. It involves resource allocation that ensures everyone has what they need to perform their roles effectively. The ultimate expression of leadership through mental superiority is creating what systems thinkers call emergent intelligence, collective problem-solving capabilities that exceed anything any individual member could achieve alone. This happens when you successfully combine diverse perspectives, complementary skills, and sophisticated thinking frameworks into coordinated action toward shared objectives. Emergent intelligence creates breakthrough solutions that no individual could have developed independently. It enables groups to handle complexity that would overwhelm individual decision-makers. It produces innovations that combine insights from multiple domains in ways that create entirely new possibilities. Creating emergent intelligence requires mastering all the mental frameworks we've discussed, and then learning to orchestrate them at the group level. It's the most advanced application of mental superiority because it requires simultaneously managing individual psychology, group dynamics, systems complexity, and strategic objectives. But when successfully implemented, it creates organizational capabilities that provide sustained competitive advantages regardless of changing conditions or individual turnover. Chapter 14. The Meta-Game. Thinking about thinking. The highest level of mental superiority involves developing metacognition, thinking about thinking. While most people operate from their thoughts unconsciously, masters learn to observe their mental processes, evaluate their thinking quality, and deliberately choose cognitive strategies based on what different situations require. This meta-level awareness creates exponential improvements in mental performance because you're not just thinking better, you're optimizing how you think about different types of problems, Metacognition begins with understanding that thinking isn't a single activity, but a collection of different cognitive processes that can be consciously selected and combined. Problem-solving uses different mental processes than creative ideation, which uses different processes than analytical evaluation, which uses different processes than strategic planning. Most people use the same thinking approach for every situation, like trying to use a hammer for every task, regardless of whether you're dealing with nails, screws, or delicate electronics. Mental masters develop cognitive flexibility, the ability to recognize what type of thinking a situation requires and consciously engage the appropriate cognitive processes. When facing complex analytical problems, they engage systematic, logical reasoning. When generating creative solutions, they allow associative, non-linear thinking. When making decisions under time pressure, they rely on pattern recognition and intuition developed through previous experience. This cognitive flexibility requires building awareness of your default thinking patterns and the situations where those patterns are helpful versus harmful. Most people have cognitive preferences developed through their education, profession, and personal history. Engineers tend toward analytical thinking. Artists tend toward creative thinking. Managers tend toward pragmatic thinking. These preferences serve them well in familiar contexts, but become limitations when facing challenges that require different types of thinking. Metacognitive awareness involves noticing when your default thinking patterns aren't producing useful results and consciously switching to different approaches. If analytical thinking isn't solving a creative problem, you need to recognize this quickly and shift to divergent, associative thinking. If creative brainstorming isn't producing actionable solutions, you need to switch to convergent, evaluative thinking. Advanced metacognition involves understanding the conditions that optimize different types of thinking and deliberately creating those conditions when you need specific cognitive capabilities. Analytical thinking works best when you're rested, focused, and have access to relevant information. Creative thinking often works better when you're relaxed, distracted from the problem, or engaged in physical activity that occupies your conscious mind while allowing subconscious processing. Strategic thinking requires alternating between big-picture perspective and detailed analysis, often over extended time periods. Intuitive thinking works best when you have extensive experience in the relevant domain and can trust pattern recognition developed through previous exposure. Understanding these conditions allows you to structure your environment and schedule to support the types of thinking your current challenges require. Metacognition also involves recognizing cognitive biases and systematic errors in thinking that affect everyone but can be managed through conscious awareness. Confirmation bias causes you to seek information that supports existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence. Availability bias causes you to overweight easily remembered examples when making decisions. Sunk cost bias causes you to continue ineffective approaches just because you've already invested effort in them. These biases exist because they were adaptive in evolutionary environments, but often produce poor decisions in modern contexts. You can't eliminate them entirely, but you can learn to notice when they're likely affecting your thinking and implement conscious corrections. This might involve actively seeking disconfirming evidence when making important decisions, consulting diverse information sources when evaluating options, or using structured decision-making processes that prevent emotional or intuitive biases from dominating analytical reasoning. The most sophisticated level of metacognition involves what philosophers call epistemic humility, understanding the limits of your knowledge and the uncertainty inherent in complex situations. Most people operate with more confidence in their beliefs and predictions than accuracy data would justify. They mistake correlation for causation, assume their limited experience represents universal patterns, and underestimate how often experts in every field are wrong about future developments. Epistemic humility doesn't mean being uncertain about everything or lacking confidence in well-supported conclusions. It means calibrating your confidence levels to match the actual reliability of your information and reasoning. It means distinguishing between areas where you have strong evidence and areas where you're making educated guesses. It means updating your beliefs when new evidence contradicts previous conclusions rather than defending outdated positions. This intellectual honesty improves decision-making because it prevents overconfidence errors while maintaining appropriate confidence in areas where your knowledge is solid. It improves learning because you remain open to new information rather than filtering everything through existing beliefs. It improves relationships because people trust advisors who acknowledge uncertainties rather than claiming false certainty about inherently unpredictable matters. Metacognitive skills also include understanding how emotions affect thinking and learning to optimize emotional states for different cognitive tasks. Positive emotions tend to broaden attention and facilitate creative, associative thinking. Negative emotions tend to narrow attention and facilitate focused, analytical thinking. Moderate stress can improve performance on familiar tasks, but impairs performance on complex or novel tasks. Learning to manage your emotional state, based on what type of thinking you need, enables consistently higher quality cognitive performance. If you need to engage in creative problem solving, you might listen to music, spend time in nature, or engage in physical exercise to generate positive emotional states that support divergent thinking. If you need to focus on detailed analytical work, you might eliminate distractions, work in quiet environments, and structure tasks to minimize stress and interruptions. Advanced metacognition involves developing what researchers call cognitive monitoring, real-time awareness of your thinking, quality, and effectiveness. Instead of just thinking, you simultaneously observe your thinking process and evaluate whether it's producing useful results. This allows you to catch unproductive thought patterns quickly and redirect mental energy toward more effective approaches. Cognitive monitoring involves asking yourself questions like, is this line of thinking moving me toward a solution, or just creating more confusion? Am I getting stuck in analysis paralysis when I should be taking action? Am I making this problem more complicated than it needs to be? What assumptions am I making that might be wrong? This self-questioning becomes automatic with practice and dramatically improves thinking quality. The ultimate level of metacognition involves what some researchers call meta-metacognition. Thinking about your thinking about thinking. This involves developing awareness of your metacognitive patterns and optimizing those patterns for different situations. You might notice that you tend to overanalyze decisions in certain contexts, underanalyze decisions in other contexts, or consistently miss certain types of considerations when evaluating options. This awareness allows you to develop personal thinking systems that compensate for your cognitive blind spots and leverage your cognitive strengths. Instead of just hoping to think better, you create systematic approaches that reliably produce high-quality thinking, regardless of circumstances, mood, or pressure. Chapter 15. Sustaining mental dominance for life. Mental superiority isn't achievement you reach and then maintain effortlessly. It's a dynamic capability that requires continuous cultivation, deliberate practice, and systematic protection against the forces that naturally degrade mental performance over time. Understanding how to sustain and continue developing mental dominance throughout your life is what separates those who experience temporary improvement from those who build lasting transformation that compounds across decades. The first challenge to sustaining mental dominance is what psychologists call hedonic adaptation. Your tendency to return to baseline levels of satisfaction and performance even after significant improvements. When you first develop better decision-making skills or emotional regulation capabilities, the improvements feel dramatic and motivating. But over time, these enhanced capabilities become your new normal, and you stop consciously appreciating or maintaining them. This adaptation process serves an important evolutionary function by preventing you from becoming complacent when facing new challenges. But it also creates a risk that you'll unconsciously regress to previous mental patterns if you don't actively work to maintain your enhanced capabilities. Just as physical fitness deteriorates without continued exercise, mental fitness requires ongoing practice and challenge to prevent decline. Sustaining mental dominance requires building what researchers call maintenance systems, structures, habits, and practices that preserve enhanced capabilities even when motivation fluctuates or competing priorities demand attention. These systems must be designed to operate automatically rather than depending on conscious willpower, because willpower is unreliable over long time periods. The foundation of effective maintenance systems is regular mental training that continues challenging your cognitive capabilities rather than just preserving current abilities. This might involve reading challenging material that forces you to develop new mental models, engaging in complex problem-solving that requires advanced thinking frameworks, or seeking out situations that test your emotional regulation skills under pressure. Maintenance training differs from initial skill development because it focuses on preserving and refining existing capabilities rather than building new ones from scratch. It requires less intensity than skill acquisition, but must be more consistent over longer time periods. The key is identifying minimal effective doses, the smallest amount of practice that prevents decay while being sustainable indefinitely. This might mean dedicating 15 minutes daily to challenging mental exercises, setting aside 1 hour weekly for strategic thinking and planning, or engaging in quarterly intensive learning experiences that push beyond current capabilities. The specific activities matter less than establishing consistent patterns that ensure your mental capacities continue being challenged and developed. Another essential component of maintenance systems is what researchers call environmental curation. Deliberately designing your surroundings, relationships, and information diet to support continued mental excellence rather than degradation. Your environment has enormous influence on your thinking quality, and most modern environments are optimized for comfort and entertainment rather than cognitive development. Environmental curation involves creating physical spaces that facilitate focused work and deep thinking. This means establishing distraction-free zones where you can engage in demanding mental activities without interruptions. It means organizing information and resources so that important materials are easily accessible while distracting or low-value information is minimized. Social environment curation is equally important because the people you spend time with significantly influence your mental standards and development trajectory. Surrounding yourself with individuals who operate at high cognitive levels maintains pressure to continue improving rather than becoming complacent. Engaging with people who challenge your thinking prevents intellectual stagnation that occurs when you only interact with those who share your existing perspectives. Information diet curation involves being strategic about what content you consume, rather than passively accepting whatever captures your attention. This means actively seeking out challenging, high-quality information sources while eliminating low-value content that doesn't contribute to your mental development. It means choosing books, articles, podcasts, and conversations based on their potential to enhance your thinking rather than just their entertainment value. Sustaining mental dominance also requires understanding and managing what researchers call cognitive load, the amount of mental effort your daily activities require. Modern life creates enormous cognitive demands through constant decision-making, information processing, and attention management. If you don't systematically manage these demands, they can exhaust your mental capacity and prevent you from engaging in the challenging thinking that maintains mental superiority. Cognitive load management involves identifying and eliminating unnecessary mental demands that don't contribute meaningful value to your life or goals. This might mean simplifying daily routines to reduce trivial decision-making, using systems and templates for recurring activities, or delegating responsibilities that don't require your specific capabilities. It also involves protecting your peak mental energy for the most important cognitive tasks rather than dissipating it on low-value activities. This requires understanding your natural energy rhythms and scheduling demanding mental work during periods when your cognitive capacity is highest while handling routine tasks during lower energy periods. Advanced sustainability strategies include developing what researchers call cognitive reserves, mental capabilities that provide resilience against age, related cognitive decline, and temporary setbacks from illness, stress, or life disruptions. These reserves are built through continuous learning, physical exercise, social engagement, and challenging mental activities that create redundant neural pathways and enhanced brain plasticity. Research shows that individuals who engage in lifelong learning and mental challenges maintain cognitive abilities much longer than those who become intellectually passive after their formal education ends. Learning new skills, especially those that require complex coordination between different brain regions, creates cognitive reserves that provide protection against various forms of mental decline. Physical health is also crucial for sustaining mental performance because brain function depends on cardiovascular health, sleep quality, nutrition, and exercise. Mental superiority requires treating your brain as a physical organ that needs proper care rather than assuming that cognitive capabilities are independent of physical condition. This means maintaining exercise routines that support brain health, sleep habits that enable cognitive recovery, and nutrition practices that optimize mental energy and clarity. The most sophisticated approach to sustaining mental dominance involves what some researchers call meta-adaptation, continuously evolving your mental development strategies based on changing circumstances, age-related factors, and new scientific understanding about cognitive optimization. Instead of rigidly following the same practices indefinitely, you adapt your approach based on what current research reveals about brain health and what your personal experience shows about what works best for your specific situation. This requires staying informed about developments in cognitive science, neuroscience, and psychology that might inform better approaches to mental development. It involves experimenting with new techniques and technologies that might enhance cognitive performance. It means regularly evaluating your current practices and updating them based on results, rather than continuing ineffective approaches just because they worked previously. The ultimate goal of sustaining mental dominance is creating what researchers call cognitive flourishing, a state where your mental capabilities continue expanding throughout your life rather than just being preserved. Instead of fighting against inevitable decline, you structure your life to enable continued growth in wisdom, insight, and mental sophistication, even as some specific cognitive abilities may change with age. Cognitive flourishing involves shifting focus from raw processing speed and memory capacity toward pattern recognition, judgment, and the integration of knowledge across multiple domains. These capabilities often improve with age and experience when properly cultivated, creating the possibility that your 70s and 80s could be your most mentally productive decades rather than periods of decline. This long-term perspective on mental development changes how you approach daily choices and long-term planning. Instead of optimizing only for immediate performance, you make decisions that support decades of continued mental growth. Instead of treating mental development as a youth activity, you embrace it as a lifelong practice that becomes more rather than less important as you age. The mind that wins consistently isn't just superior today, it's designed to keep winning for the rest of your life.